Welcome back to another episode of ACC Basics. This series is meant for beginner sim racers or people who want to go over the basics once again. So subscribe if you don't want to miss a thing. Today we're going to be talking about overtaking. It comes in handy if you want to win races. And in this video I'll give you my personal opinion on overtaking strategies. And in my opinion there's 3 parts to overtaking. The first is closing the gap. Then the second is the move. And the third is defending your position when you've done the overtake. Now, closing the gap is fairly straightforward. It means you're catching up to your opponent, the driver in front of you. There's no special sauce, no tips or tricks for this. You'll have to drive consistently without big mistakes at a faster pace than the driver in front of you. And over time, the gap between the two of you will get smaller and smaller. That makes sense, right? Now, there are some exceptions, of course. If your opponent makes a mistake, the gap is closed more easily, and oftentimes you get a free overtaking opportunity out of it. But beware of a crashing driver. You should carefully watch what their vehicle is doing and avoid getting caught up in their crash. Besides getting closer to your opponent, there's one very important thing you should do while you're closing the gap. Observe your opponent. Watch their driving style. Are they braking late? Trouble with some corner entries or exits? Is there any chance they'll crash into you when you're overtaking them? These are some of the important questions you gotta answer before you can safely make your move. It's also important that you keep a safe distance while looking for that opportunity of overtaking. The last thing you want to do is crash into them because they brake earlier than you had thought. While you're closing the gap, you should be planning the move, an overtaking strategy based on their behavior. Here's some examples. Your opponent might be braking too early at certain corners. You can take advantage of that by braking at the right time and passing them on the in or outside, if there's room for that in the corner, of course. Or your opponent has poor corner exits, which means a lower top speed on the straights afterwards, and you can take advantage of that by exiting the corners properly and overtaking them on the straights. And if your opponent has an overall slower pace than you, try to find space on the track and overtake them when you see fit. You don't want to be stuck behind someone with half your pace. These moves all work perfectly when you're clearly more skilled than the opponent you're trying to overtake. It gets a little more complicated when you're on the same skill level as your opponent. When the driver in front of you is a real challenge and you can trust them to not crash into you, you gotta bring your A game. You gotta stay consistent. Keep a competitive pace and remain in striking distance. And use my super secret advanced tactics I learned at the CIA. Attacking is a game of psychology. You gotta get into the head of your opponent and force them to make mistakes. The first tactic is taking control of the inside line. When you have the inside line in a corner, they, your opponent, cannot use the apex, which will cost them time. To get the inside line, you gotta be able to think ahead. When you know a left-hander is coming up and you can get on their left side on the straight, the only thing you gotta do is stay beside them for that corner. You'll force them off the ideal racing line, and they'll have to go wide, losing time. But beware, the next corner they might have the inside because you were not thinking ahead. Another tactic is faking your moves. When you're faking your moves, you want your opponent to think you're trying to pass them and they'll have to defend. What you're actually trying to do is moving them off the ideal racing line and making them slower. You can also use fake moves to make your opponent brake too late. If you're coming up to a corner and you're on the outside, acting like you're gonna pass them, try to keep up the charade till you're in the braking zone where you obviously brake on time. But when they try to match your braking, they're on the inside and they'll probably overshoot. Because when you're on the outside, you're permitted to brake a little later than if you'd be on the inside. So by taking the outside line and making a fake move, you might force them to overshoot the corner and take their place. When you're trying to make a move, you want to confuse the defending driver, and the best case scenario is making them feel afraid of making any mistakes. People who are afraid of making mistakes often play it a little safer, resulting in a slower pace. And in your best case scenario, the other driver will become so afraid that he will even stop trying to defend and just let you pass. So try some psychological warfare. It's really fun. Now we're on to the last part of overtaking, and it's the defense. And we've already talked about this, but from the opposite perspective. When you've overtaken a driver that's below your skill level, keep up your pace and they'll probably disappear in your mirror soon enough. But when you've passed a driver after a long fought battle, you gotta defend your position. And don't fall for any psychological nonsense, let them know who's boss. You got your racing line and they can go to hell before you give up any space. Seriously now, think ahead, try to keep control of the inside line, focus on keeping the pace up and don't move yourself into suboptimal racing positions because you want to block the other driver. And don't be a crusty foreskin by zigzagging on the straights, keep it fair and keep it clean. Now, let me know if these tips were helpful. Practice makes perfect, of course. Subscribe if you want to have fun with your sim racing content, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. Sleep tight, my beautiful baby boys. Mwah. Love ya.